All right, so today we are going deep into the Swedish economy.
Okay.
Specifically, how some fairly recent changes are impacting like everyday Swedes. You know, Sweden with this like almost legendary social safety net, universal healthcare, free education, the whole shebang. But our source, this document, Swedish economy is waning, kind of has us wondering if that model is really holding up or if there are some cracks starting to show.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, Sweden's system, often called the Swedish model, has been, globally admired for decades now.
Yeah.
It's built on this idea that you pay high taxes, but in exchange for those high taxes, you get these generous welfare programs.
Yeah.
But that whole model relies on having a strong middle class that is willing to actually shoulder that tax burden. And that's where our source is kind of suggesting that things are changing.
Yeah, and that's where it gets kind of interesting, right? Because in 2024, Sweden actually cut taxes for its highest earners, which seems a bit counterintuitive for a country that is known for social welfare, wouldn't you say?
It certainly raises some eyebrows.
Yeah.
And it's not the only shift.
Right.
The source also points out that they abolished the plastic bag tax, and there's increased spending on migration control.
Oh, wow.
So these changes taken together suggest a potential shift in priorities, maybe away from traditional welfare and more towards a fiscally conservative approach.
Now, for those of you who might not be super familiar with like the term fiscal conservatism, it generally refers to policies that favor lower taxes and less government spending.
Right.
So we're seeing this potential shift in Sweden, and it's all happening against a backdrop of some, pretty challenging economic conditions.
Yeah.
The source really paints a picture of low growth, high inflation.
Yes.
Imagine your grocery bill like skyrocketing while your paycheck is just staying the same. And then on top of that, you've got this persistent housing crisis.
Exactly. And that creates a real squeeze on middle and low income families.
Right.
Who are already feeling the pinch.
Yeah.
If housing costs keep rising while wages are staying the same, how do you make ends meet?
Right.
And that's the reality that a lot of Swedes are facing.
Okay, so that's making me sweat a little bit just thinking about that.
Yeah.
But here's another wrinkle from our source. Sweden is like a global leader in green energy.
Right.
But rising energy prices are really hitting consumers hard. How does that square? It seems a bit contradictory.
Well, it does, and it is, because transitioning to a more sustainable energy system is complex.
All right.
It's a very complex process.
Yeah.
And so, for example, take the whole debate around nuclear energy subsidies in Sweden.
Okay.
Some argue that these subsidies are actually diverting resources away from other renewable solutions, and that's making the transition even more expensive for consumers.
I see.
So it's complex.
Yeah. So we've got this picture of like economic uncertainty, these shifting priorities, and a real squeeze on everyday Swedes. It's starting to feel a bit like that IKEA bookshelf you thought would be easy to assemble, but then 3 hours later, you're still just surrounded by screws and Allen wrenches.
Exactly.
But let's go back to that title for a minute. Swedish economy is waning.
Yeah.
Is it really that dire? Is the model actually failing?
Well, the source is presenting a nuanced argument.
Okay.
On the one hand, Sweden's system still provides all these vital services, especially for the most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And that's a huge positive. You can't underestimate, the importance of universal health care and free education.
Right.
However, the catch is there's this growing concern that the middle class is actually bearing a disproportionate burden to keep this whole system going while the wealthy are getting these tax cuts. And this is leading to this perception that it's unfair.
Right. And the source mentions that many Swedes are feeling anxious and insecure. They're worried about their standard of living and whether or not this welfare state that they've always relied on is really going to be there for them down the road.
It makes sense when you combine rising costs and stagnant wages.
Right.
And this feeling that maybe the government is favoring the wealthy over the average citizen.
Yeah.
It's bound to create this unease and make you wonder, is this system, as well-intentioned as it is? Is it really working for everyone like it's supposed to?
And that's a big question.
Yeah.
That's a really big question. And it's one that we're going to continue to unpack even further in the next part of our deep dive.
Yep.
We'll look at how these economic anxieties are actually playing out in people's lives and explore what it all means for the future of the Swedish model.
All right. It sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Swedish economy.
Yeah. So we kind of left off with this pretty big question, hanging in the air. Is Sweden's famed social safety net actually working for everybody like it's supposed to.
Right.
To figure that out, we need to see how everyday Swedes are actually experiencing these economic changes.
Right, and that's where I think the human side of this whole story comes in.
Yeah.
Our source paints this picture of many Swedes really feeling this squeeze, particularly middle-income families that are grappling with inflation, housing costs, and wages that just aren't keeping pace.
It's like watching, like a friend struggle to keep their head above water, and you just want to help, but you're not really sure what to do.
Exactly. And then, for folks in lower income brackets,
right.
The situation is even more precarious.
Yeah.
Many are like heavily reliant on government assistance, just even make ends meet.
So the system that was like designed to be a safety net is now kind of feeling the strain a bit.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the source even mentions, that this economic pressure is actually causing people to change their behavior.
Okay, how so?
Well, Swedes are saving more.
Okay.
And they're cutting back on like non-essential things.
Oh, so maybe fewer spontaneous trips to IKEA.
Perhaps. Yeah, the data suggests that people are definitely tightening their belts.
Okay.
And becoming a lot more cautious with their spending. There's this prevailing sense of, financial insecurity.
Yeah.
And worry about what the future holds.
Which makes total sense when you think about the broader, economic trends we were talking about.
Exactly.
Like stagnation, inflation, and this feeling that maybe the government is kind of prioritizing the wealthy over the average citizen.
Right. And that can then lead to a sense of disillusionment.
Right.
A feeling that maybe the system isn't working as fairly as it once did.
Yeah.
And, people start to question, is everyone really sharing the tax burden equally?
Right. And that kind of brings us to another key point from the source.
Yeah.
This perception that policies like, the recent tax cuts for higher earners are kind of widening that gap between the rich and everyone else.
You're exactly right. And that feeds into this debate about, is Sweden maybe drifting away from its traditional emphasis on egalitarianism?
Right. So with all of this in mind, is the Swedish model broken? Do we need to hit the reset button?
Well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
The model still provides, really significant benefits, and especially, when it comes to healthcare, education, social services. I mean, those are huge advantages that a lot of countries would envy.
Yeah.
But, the takeaway here is that even a system as celebrated as Sweden's, it faces these challenges in this changing economic landscape.
Yeah.
And the question isn't, is the system good or bad?
Right.
Is it adapting to the current realities? And is it actually serving all segments of society effectively?
Yeah. It's like that saying, the true test of a good system isn't how it works when times are good, but how it holds up under pressure.
Exactly. And the Swedish system is definitely under some serious pressure right now. But what I think is also fascinating is this isn't just a Swedish problem.
Oh, what do you mean?
I mean, this whole tension between, maintaining a strong social safety net and navigating, economic headwinds. I mean, that's a challenge faced by a lot of developed nations these days.
So in a way, Sweden's kind of like a microcosm of a much larger, global issue.
You could say that, yeah, every country is grappling with how to balance, social welfare programs with economic realities.
Yeah.
And I think Sweden's experience offers us some valuable insights into, the complexities and the potential pitfalls of trying to strike that balance.
Wow. So this deep dive is relevant for all of us, no matter where we live.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think by understanding what's happening in Sweden, we can better understand, the challenges and the choices that our own societies are facing.
That's a lot to process. But before we get too lost in the big picture, there's one more crucial aspect we need to look at.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The potential consequences of this growing public discontent. I mean, that's where things could get really interesting.
Now you've got me hooked. But I guess we'll have to save that for the final part of our deep dive.
Indeed.
Okay. So we're back for the final part of our journey into the Swedish economy.
Yeah, this time we're going to look at the potential ripple effects of all these economic anxieties and social tensions.
It's kind of think of it this way. You drop a pebble into a pond.
Yeah.
And those ripples just keep spreading outward.
Exactly.
What starts as individual, financial worries can become these bigger, shifts across society.
Absolutely. And our source even hinted at this, suggesting that, if these economic challenges keep going, we could see like an increase in public protests and dissatisfaction.
Sweden has always been known for like stability, social harmony.
Yes.
It makes you wonder what happens when like those foundations start to crack under the weight of, all these pressures.
It's a valid question. I mean, we're seeing rising inequality, this sense that maybe the tax system isn't fair. Anxieties about, the future of the welfare state.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all issues that can really erode, the fabric of a society that prides itself on consensus and cooperation.
Right. Could this discontent actually lead to like political instability? That seems a bit drastic.
Well, it's not outside the realm of possibility. I mean, in times of like economic uncertainty, that populist movements or political parties that offer these, simple, often divisive solutions, they can gain a lot of traction. They might blame immigrants for economic woes or, promise to like drastically cut taxes, even if those solutions are, ultimately harmful in the long run.
Okay, that's a little unsettling. It makes you wonder if there's a way to like prevent that kind of downward spiral, what steps can be taken to address, those root causes?
Well, that's the million krona question, isn't it?
Right.
There's no easy fix. There's no magic bullet. But, tackling issues like income inequality, making housing more affordable, ensuring that the tax system is, seen as fair and equitable. Those would be some good places to start.
So it's not just about, economic policies. Right. It's also about addressing like the human side of things.
Absolutely.
Like the sense of insecurity and anxiety that our source was talking about.
Exactly. People need to feel like they have a stake in society.
Yeah.
That their voices are actually being heard and that their concerns are taken seriously.
It's about creating like a sense of shared purpose, a sense of community where everyone feels supported.
Well said. And that's where your leadership comes in.
Okay.
Both political and societal leaders need to step up and address these challenges, head on with empathy and a genuine commitment to finding solutions that benefit everyone.
So what have we learned from our deep dive into the Swedish economy? What are the key takeaways here for you, the listener?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that even like seemingly strong systems can be vulnerable, to economic and social pressures.
Yeah.
It's really our collective responsibility to be aware of these challenges, to, engage in these thoughtful conversations and to advocate for solutions that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
We're all in this together, right?
We are.
Whether we live in Sweden, the U.S., or anywhere else in the world, these challenges, they resonate.
Absolutely. And I think by learning from each other's experiences, we can work towards creating more equitable and resilient societies for the future.
And on that note of global solidarity, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, we want to leave you with one final thought to kind of ponder.
Okay.
If a country like Sweden, renowned for its social safety net, is facing these kinds of challenges, what does that tell us about the global landscape? And what steps can we take both individually and collectively to make sure that our own societies are equipped to navigate, all the complexities of the 21st century?
Lots to think about.
It is a lot to think about. Keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep striving for a better future until next time.